In the last week of December 2024, search and rescue teams in Tasmania recovered 3 bodies from the wilderness in under 7 days. These weren't inexperienced tourists in the wrong shoes. They were seasoned, well-equipped bushwalkers, the kind who plan for months and know exactly how to read a map. One of them was found lying in the open by a complete stranger. Another walker who stumbled across him on a remote ridge, hours from the nearest road. This wasn't one trail having a bad week. It was a pattern. Scattered across this continent are routes that locals, the very people who grew up beside them, quietly refuse to walk alone, or refuse to walk at all. Not because of ghost stories, not because of curses, because they have watched, again and again, exactly what these places are capable of doing to people who underestimate them. Today we're going past the postcard version of Australian hiking and into the trails where the locals themselves draw the line. If you're new here, Hidden Origins exists to dig beneath Australia's landscapes and uncover the real stories behind them, geological, historical, and cultural, the parts most travel guides leave out. If that's the kind of rabbit hole you enjoy falling into, subscribe now, because we're about to get a lot more remote. To understand why these trails inspire so much caution, you have to understand how strange and old this continent's wild places really are. Start in the far southwest of Tasmania, in a range called the Western Arthurs. From a distance it doesn't look dramatic, a long jagged spine of quartzite rising out of button grass plains. Up close, it's one of the most technical multi-day walks in the country, a knife-edge ridgeline studded with glacial lakes like Lake Oberon, gouged out during the ice ages and sitting in bowls of exposed rock with almost no shelter. There's no quick way off this ridge once you're committed. You're locked into days of exposed scrambling under a full pack, in weather that can turn from sunshine to sleet inside an hour. Now travel northeast to the Victorian Alps and Mount Bogong, the highest point in the state. Unlike the young, jagged peaks of somewhere like New Zealand, Australia's high country is ancient and worn down, smoothed by hundreds of millions of years of erosion into rolling, almost gentle-looking summits. That gentleness is deceptive. The treeless plateau at the top offers no windbreak and no landmark once cloud or snow rolls in. Travel further still, into the red centre of the country, and the West MacDonnell Ranges outside Alice Springs hold the Larapinta Trail, 223 kilometres of folded. Ancient rock, dry creek beds, and gorges that trap heat like an oven. And closer to Sydney than any of these, the sandstone plateau of the Blue Mountains hides steep, disorienting gorges barely an hour from a capital city, where the skyline vanishes the moment you drop below the cliff line. 4 landscapes, 4 completely different kinds of danger, and every single one within a day's drive of a major town. Long before national parks, ranges or warning signs existed, the Aboriginal peoples whose country this is had already worked out which places demanded caution and which demanded that people simply stay away. This knowledge isn't folklore in the dismissive sense that word usually implies. Much of it is carried through songlines, oral maps encoded in story, song and ceremony that guided safe travel across enormous distances long before compasses or trail markers existed. A songline could tell you exactly where water was reliable, where the weather turned violent, and where you simply did not camp information passed down with enough precision that people navigated the same difficult country for thousands of generations without a single written map. In the Flinders Ranges of South Australia, the walking track to St Mary Peak, known to the Adnyamathanha people as Ngari Mudlana, follows the rim of a vast natural amphitheatre said to have been formed by 2 akura, or serpent beings encircling the land. Hikers are free to walk most of the range, but the Adnyamathanha ask that people stop below the true summit, at a point called Tandera Saddle, out of respect for the story held in that final stretch of ridge. In northern New South Wales, Wollumben, the mountain colonial maps labelled Mount Warning, is sacred to the Bundjalung people as a place of ceremony and law. Climbing it has never been illegal, but traditional owners have long asked visitors not to, and land managers now actively discourage the summit route in respect of that request. And in Kakadu, in the Northern Territory, the Jawoyn people ask for the walking track above Gunlam Falls to be closed entirely, after concerns that upgrade works had disturbed a culturally significant site. Parks Australia agreed, and the track has stayed shut ever since. Kakadu itself is jointly managed by Parks Australia and its traditional owners, which is exactly why a request like this one carries real enforceable weight rather than remaining a polite suggestion. None of this is superstition waiting for science to explain it away. It's law, carried for tens of thousands of years by people who have observed these landscapes longer than any written record exists, and who identified the same danger zones and sacred boundaries that modern land managers are only now catching up to. When a track gets called locals only, it's worth asking exactly whose knowledge that warning is built on. The historical record backs up what both the traditional custodians and the terrain itself seem to be saying. In August 1936, 3 young skiers, Cleve Cole, Mick Hull, and Howard Michelle, attempted the first winter crossing of the Bogong High Plains. A blizzard trapped them near the summit for 4 days, and when they finally tried to push on, they lost their way completely, wandering for almost a week with almost no food. By the time Michelle struck out alone to raise the alarm, Cole could no longer walk unaided. He died of hypothermia within days of being found. A hut built in his memory the following year still stands on the mountain today as a compulsory shelter check for winter walkers. Chillingly, in August 1943, 3 more skiers, Georgian Gadsden, John McRae, and Edward Welch, died in a blizzard on that same mountain, while trying to reach that very same memorial hut. In January 2018, a 33-year-old American tourist descending Mount Sonder on the Larapinta Trail became separated from his hiking companion as temperatures climbed past 42 degrees Celsius. He took a wrong turn. His body was found later that day, less than a kilometre from the car park. Police later noted that heat and dehydration were the clear contributing factors, and that his limited water supply had made the outcome almost inevitable once he lost the track. In 2020, a 75-year-old bushwalker told his family he was heading out for a walk near Evans Lookout in the Blue Mountains. When he didn't return, a multi-agency search involving police, the SES, and specialist rescue teams combed the area for days before his body was found on a cliff ledge in the bush just north of the lookout, a stretch of terrain many locals know is far more treacherous than the fenced viewing platform beside it suggests. And in December 2024, a 54-year-old man from Queensland set out alone on the Western Arthur Range traverse. Days later, a passing bushwalker found him on the track, unresponsive. It marked the 3rd bushwalker to die in the state in under a week, following a fatal fall near Federation Peak just days earlier, and it prompted police to state plainly that anyone attempting these ranges should never do so alone. If part of you is waiting for this to turn supernatural a curse, a conspiracy, something unexplained, keep watching. Because what the data on these trails actually shows is stranger and far more mundane than any ghost story. Subscribe now, because we're about to debunk the myths and get to what's really going on out there. Wherever people vanish in wild places, theories tend to follow. In the United States, a persistent online phenomenon known as Missing 411 has spent years arguing that clusters of disappearances near national parks point to something unexplained, patterns officials supposedly can't or won't account for. Australia has its own quieter version of this forum threads about cursed sections of track, claims of strange animal behaviour, even the occasional suggestion that certain gorges have some kind of magnetic or electronic dead zone that swallows hikers' phones and judgment along with them. Researchers who actually study lost person behaviour in the Australian wilderness draw on something called the Australian Lost Person Database, built from decades of real search and rescue call-outs across the country. to model exactly where, when, and why people go missing. It's a deeply unglamorous data set, full of GPS points, weather logs, and survivor questionnaires, and it is far more useful at predicting the next incident than any theory involving curses or vanishing signal. What it shows is something far less mysterious. The patterns match almost exactly what basic probability would predict. Areas that see more visitors generate more incidents. Areas with unpredictable weather, difficult navigation, and limited phone reception generate more serious incidents. Inexperienced hikers get lost more often in gentle terrain close to cities, like the Blue Mountains, simply because far more inexperienced hikers go there. Experienced hikers die less often overall, but when they do, it's overwhelmingly in extreme, remote terrain like the Western Arthurs, because that's the only terrain difficult enough to catch them. Coronial findings across these cases tell the same story again and again: hypothermia, dehydration, falls, exhaustion. None of them include an unexplained element that has survived serious scrutiny. It turns out the bush doesn't need a mystery to be dangerous. It just needs you to be a little underprepared on a day it decides not to cooperate. So if it isn't a curse, why do these places still feel like they deserve a warning label? Because the mundane explanation is, in its own way, just as unsettling. On an exposed alpine plateau like Mount Bogong's summit, or along the Western Arthur's knife-edge ridgeline, weather can shift from clear sky to zero visibility and sub-zero wind chill in under an hour, with nowhere to shelter and no fast way down. In Central Australia, a body can go from comfortable to critically dehydrated within a single afternoon once the temperature crosses 40 degrees. Especially on a quick side trip where hikers carry less water than they would for a full day's trek. In the Blue Mountains, sandstone gorges box hikers in so completely that the sky itself disappears from view, taking every landmark with it, while patchy phone reception means a wrong turn can go uncorrected for hours, sometimes days. Layer in venomous snakes, sheer drops disguised by scrub, and creeks that can rise by metres in a flash flood. And it becomes clearer why locals treat familiarity with these places as a form of respect, not a shortcut around caution. None of these hazards are hidden. They're published on national park websites, printed on trailhead signage, and repeated by every search and rescue authority in the country. And yet every year, roughly 130 bushwalkers get lost or need rescuing in the Blue Mountains alone, a single, well-signposted, heavily visited park barely an hour from Sydney. Between 2004 and 2007, close to 400 people were reported missing there. That's the real terrifying reality behind these trails. Not that something unknown is out there, but that we consistently underestimate what we already know to be true. It's the same conclusion traditional owners reached long before any of it was written into a coroner's report, that some country simply demands more respect than a casual visitor is inclined to give it. Maybe that's the thread connecting every one of these places. From a sacred ridgeline in the Flinders Ranges to a fog-bound plateau in the Victorian Alps. Long before science could explain why a landscape was dangerous, the people who belonged to that country already knew to treat it with caution. Modern research didn't discover something new here. It just caught up. So next time you see a secret trail online promising a view no tourist has seen, it's worth asking who's telling you it's secret and why so few locals actually walk it. Let us know in the comments which of these trails unsettled you the most and whether you'd still hike them yourself. And if you want more of Australia's hidden and dangerous places uncovered like this, subscribe to Hidden Origins, because there's a lot more country left to cover.